platform in the middle of winter, with nothing but a trunk, a broken promise, and $61 sewn into her coat. She was 58 years old, and she walked anyway. That is where this story begins, not with romance, not with hope, with a woman alone in the cold, picking up the only thing left that still belonged to her and deciding that was enough to keep moving. Laramie, Wyoming, January 1892. The sky that morning was the color of pewter, flat, heavy, unmoved by anything happening beneath it. The train had groaned into the station 20 minutes late, its iron wheels grinding against the frozen rails with a sound like something in pain. Steam poured from beneath the carriages and dissolved into the cold before it could become anything. Clara Whitmore stepped off the last carriage and onto the platform. She did not look around for reassurance. She did not smooth her coat or adjust her hat. She simply stood still for one moment, the way she always did before walking into something that mattered, and breathed the cold Wyoming air into her lungs like she was tasting it. She had sold everything she owned to be here. 11 years in 2 small rooms in Cincinnati. Furniture sold piece by piece over 3 weeks. The oak writing desk her father had left her, gone for $4 to a young couple who didn't know what they had. The books, all 41 of them, boxed and sold to a second-hand dealer who weighed them rather than counted them. The lavender curtains she had sewn herself, left behind because no one had offered anything for them, and she couldn't bear to watch someone else name a price. She had done all of it for a letter from a man named Elias Boone, age 61, rancher, Laramie, Wyoming. The letter had been careful, deliberate, the kind of letter a man writes when he wants to appear more honest than he is. He had written the word partnership 3 times. He had written the word respect twice. He had not once written the word young. Clara had read it 11 times before she answered it. She had believed him. Now she stood on the platform and watched him walk toward her from the side of the building. Neat coat, careful posture, the particular walk of a man who's already made a decision and is simply arriving at the place where he delivers it. He stopped 4 feet from her. His eyes moved across her face, her hands, the trunk, the years she had never once tried to hide. The pause that followed was 4 seconds. She counted. "Miss Whitmore." "Yes." "I thought—" He stopped, restarted. "I expected someone younger." Clara looked at him steadily. "I am 58 years old," she said. "I stated that clearly, in writing, twice." He shifted his weight. "I know, I hope to build something here, a family, children, perhaps. I should have been more specific in what I was looking for." "You were specific enough," she said quietly. "You were simply not honest." The boy sitting on the crate nearby had stopped kicking his heels. The station clerk had put down his papers. The cold between Clara and Elias Boone was a different kind of cold than the Wyoming winter. It was the cold of a door being closed slowly and deliberately by someone who had never intended to open it wide. Elias Boone nodded once, not to her, to himself, the nod of a man tidying up a transaction. "I'm sorry, this won't work." He turned and walked away. No offer to carry the trunk, no second glance, no smallest human kindness. Just the back of a neat coat moving through the cold and then gone. Behind her, the train shuddered, groaned, and pulled away from the platform as if it too had somewhere better to be. The steam it left behind thinned and vanished in seconds. Clara stood alone. The platform was empty now. The boy had gone. The clerk had gone back to his papers. The wind moved through the gaps in the wooden boards with a low, indifferent sound.
And this is the moment, this exact moment, that will matter for the rest of this story. Because Clara Whitmore stood on that empty platform and felt everything she was entitled to feel. The humiliation, the fury, the specific and devastating grief of a woman who trusted carefully and was still betrayed. And she felt it all fully, standing there in the cold with nobody watching. She gave herself 30 seconds. She counted those too. Then she picked up the trunk and she walked. The town of Laramie did not welcome strangers. It observed them. There is a difference. Clara felt every set of eyes through every window she passed and acknowledged none of them. Her boots struck the frozen wooden sidewalk in a rhythm that said, to anyone listening closely enough, that she knew exactly where she was going, even though she did not. Past the general store with its smell of salt and sawdust bleeding out through the door. Past the church whose bells struck once as she passed, as if startled, and then fell silent. Past two women in conversation who stopped mid-sentence and watched her go by with the particular hunger of people who sense a story they don't yet know. The trunk was heavy. Her arm burned with it. She did not switch hands. She had sold everything. She had no one expecting her anywhere on earth. She had $61 and a coat and the clothes in that trunk, and the absolute, fierce, private refusal to let any of that show on her face in this town where she knew no one and no one knew her. She reached the edge of town. She stopped, just for a moment, just to breathe, just to let herself quietly acknowledge, in the space between one step and the next, that she did not know what came next, that for the first time in her carefully managed life, she was standing at the edge of something with no map and no plan. She breathed in. She breathed out. That trunk looks heavier than it ought to. The voice came from her left, low, unhurried. The voice of a man who speaks carefully because he means what he says. She turned. He was leaning against the post outside a small livery stable, tall, somewhere past 60, she guessed. His face had been weathered by decades of outdoor work into something that was not rough so much as settled, the way good timber settles, taking on strength from every season it survives. His hands were large and rested easy at his sides. His eyes were dark and steady and moved to her face and stayed there, not cataloging, not calculating, just looking. "Daniel Hale," he said. "There's space inside to set that down." "You invite strangers this easily?" He considered the question the way it deserved to be considered. Only the ones who keep standing after they've been left. Something moved in her chest. Not warmth, not yet. Something older and more careful than warmth. The particular feeling of being seen by someone who isn't looking for anything back. She followed him inside.
His wagon was plain and sound. His horse, a gray mare with a calm, deliberate way of moving through the snow, seemed to have a personal arrangement with the cold. Clara sat beside him on the bench as they drove out of town and felt, for the first time since stepping off that train, that she did not need to perform anything, that she could simply sit and look at the pale winter fields and breathe. "You came for him?" Daniel asked eventually. "I came for the idea of him," she said, "for the possibility that partnership was still something available to a woman my age." She paused. "Seems I was wrong about the man. I'm not yet ready to decide if I was wrong about the possibility." He nodded at that, slowly, like someone filing something carefully away. "His loss," he said. "His choice," she replied. "There's a difference. Loss implies something taken from him. He put it down himself." Daniel looked at her for a moment, just a moment, and then looked back at the road.
His cabin sat beyond a low ridge, settled into the landscape as if it had grown there over many patient years. Smoke rose from the chimney in a thin, straight line. Inside, the smell of pine and wood smoke and coffee hit her like something physical, warmth not just of temperature, but of inhabitation, of a space that had been lived in honestly for a long time. He set her trunk by the fire without asking where she wanted it. "Chair's yours," he said. "Stove's warm. Nothing needs deciding tonight." She sat. She told herself she was resting. She told herself she would figure out what came next in the morning. She told herself this was temporary. But the truth she was not yet brave enough to say out loud, was that she had walked through that door and felt, without knowing why, that she was not in the wrong place. That night, lying on the narrow cot in the back room, listening to the fire settle and the wind press against the walls, Clara Whitmore did something she had not done since Cincinnati. She cried. Not from despair, not from self-pity. She cried the way people cry when the thing they have been holding at arm's length finally touches them, completely, quietly, in the dark where no one can count the seconds. She cried for the trunk she had dragged across 4 states, for the writing desk sold for $4, for 11 years in 2 small rooms that had been safe but never alive. For every morning she had woken up and thought, not yet, not yet, not yet, as if life were a train she was waiting to board, and she kept arriving at the station just as it pulled away. She cried until she was empty. Then she wiped her face and slept. In the morning, Daniel had coffee on the stove and said nothing about the redness around her eyes. He handed her a cup and sat down across from her and asked whether she knew anything about mending harness leather. She did not. "Good," he said. "Something to learn." That was the beginning. The days that followed built themselves quietly the way honest things build, without announcement, without performance. She learned that he rose before light and worked until the cold drove him inside. She learned that he ate simply and without complaint, and that he had an old dog named August who slept by the fire and occasionally dreamed so vividly that his legs ran in his sleep. She learned that he kept a book of poetry on the shelf beside his Bible, Whitman, worn soft with handling, and that he never mentioned it. She started leaving her coffee cup on the left side of the table. He started leaving room for it. She learned in fragments and margins about Margaret, about 9 years of widowhood that had never become comfortable, only familiar, about the way he still sometimes set 2 plates before catching himself, about the right side of the bed. He learned about Cincinnati, about the boarding house, about the letter she had answered, not from desperation, she told him clearly, but from refusal, the refusal of a woman at 58 to accept that the heart was simply done. One evening, 3 weeks into what neither of them had named, he moved a second chair in front of the fire. Said nothing about it. She sat in it. That was the night she understood Daniel Hale. That he was a man who spoke in gestures. That the chair was a sentence. That not explaining it was a form of trust more complete than words. Then came the night everything changed. The storm had been building since midday, the sky dropping lower and lower over the ridge until the clouds seemed to rest on the peaks like something exhausted. The wind had reached that particular pitch that means business, sustained and purposeful rather than gusting. August, the dog, had moved from his spot by the fire to press himself against Clara's leg, which she had learned was not affection but warning. 3 knocks. Hard, deliberate, evenly spaced. The knock of a man who has rehearsed it. Daniel was on his feet before the second knock finished. His hand went to the rifle above the door with a practiced calm that told her this was not the first time he had risen this way.
She stayed in her chair, but her body changed, completely still, every sense opened fully, the way an animal goes still when the wind shifts. He opened the door. The man outside was perhaps 40, brown coat, dark hat pulled low, snow across his shoulders. He was cold, genuinely cold, she could see that, but his eyes were wrong. They moved too fast, too deliberately, hitting each corner of the room in sequence and cataloging what they found. Not the eyes of a lost traveler, the eyes of someone taking inventory. "Thomas Reed," he said. "Horse went down a mile back. Need somewhere till morning." Daniel looked at him for a long moment. The fire snapped once behind them. "Floor's yours," he said finally. "Keep your hands where I can see them." Clara said nothing, but she did not sleep. She lay in the back room listening with everything she had. She heard Reed settle on the floor near the fire. She heard his breathing slow and regularize. She heard Daniel settle in his chair, not his sleeping position. She had learned the difference, his sitting watch position. Around 2 in the morning, Reed's breathing changed. It became shallower, more controlled, the particular breathing of a man lying perfectly still with his mind moving very fast. She had known men like this before. She had lived, in years she rarely spoke of, in situations that had required her to learn this particular skill, the skill of knowing when stillness is rest and when stillness is preparation. She rose without sound, dressed in the dark, checked the revolver she had kept at the bottom of the trunks in St. Louis and never once stopped carrying. She moved to the doorway. Daniel was already awake in his chair, rifle across his knees, eyes on the figure by the fire. He looked at her. She looked at him. No words, none needed. At 3 in the morning, Thomas Reed moved. He came off that floor like a man who had been coiled for hours, fast, deliberate, already knowing exactly where he was going. He lunged for the spare rifle above the side door, the one Daniel kept for the ranch hand who no longer came. His hand closed around it. Daniel crossed the room in 2 steps. The struggle was brutal and graceless, the sound of it wrong in the small, warm cabin, wrong against the backdrop of the fire and the dog barking once and the storm outside. But Clara was already standing in the center of the room. She had not rushed. She had not panicked. She had simply moved to the precise position that gave her the clearest angle, raised the revolver, and stood with the particular stillness of someone who is not afraid because they have already decided. "Put it down." Her voice was quiet, absolute. Thomas Reed turned and looked at her. She watched him take her in, her age, her nightgown, her steady hands, and she watched him arrive at the calculation she had seen men arrive at before. "You won't," he said. And Clara Whitmore looked at him with eyes that had seen Cincinnati and St. Louis and 4 states of winter and a platform in the January cold, and she said, "I have stood in worse places than this. I have held in worse moments than this, and I have never yet flinched from what needed doing." She let 1 second pass. "The only question," she said, "is whether you are going to make tonight easy or hard." The knife he'd been reaching for fell from his hand and hit the floor. The sound it made was very small. "Get out," Daniel said. He did. The door closed behind him. The storm swallowed the sound of his footsteps within seconds. The cabin was silent. August, the dog, padded forward and pressed his nose against Clara's hand. She looked down at him. Then she sat down in her chair, the one Daniel had moved close to the fire 3 weeks ago, and set the revolver on the table beside her coffee cup, and breathed.
Daniel sat across from her. Neither of them spoke for a long time. The fire burned steadily. The storm pressed at the walls. Outside, Wyoming was enormous and dark and indifferent. Inside, two people sat across from each other and knew, without saying it, without performing it, that something had become permanent tonight. Not because of the danger, not because of the revolver, but because of what the danger had revealed. That they had moved, without planning it and without discussing it, into the positions of people who protect the same thing, people who have chosen the same door. "Where did you learn to hold a gun like that?" he asked eventually. "Years before Wyoming," she said, "years before Cincinnati, years I don't often talk about." "You never told me you'd been frightened tonight."
"I wasn't frightened," she said. He looked at her. "I was ready," she said. "I have spent most of my life being ready. I am very tired of needing to be." She paused. "I'd like, for once, to simply be somewhere safe enough that I don't have to be." The words fell into the space between them. Daniel looked at his hands, then at the fire, then at her. "You're there," he said quietly, "if you want to be." Spring came to Laramie the way it always did, reluctantly at first, then suddenly and completely, as if the land had been holding its breath and finally let go. The snow retreated from the south-facing slopes. The creek behind the cabin woke up and began its steady conversation with the rocks. The morning smelled of something growing instead of something frozen. Clara planted a kitchen garden along the south wall of the cabin. Daniel built a fence around it, square, solid, built with the particular care of someone constructing something meant to last well beyond the immediate season. She watched him work from the window one afternoon and felt something she hadn't felt in so long she almost didn't recognize it. Continuity, the feeling that tomorrow was connected to today, that there was a thread running forward. One evening, as they sat in their chairs before the fire, both chairs permanent now, permanently together, Daniel set down the harness he was mending. "There's a gathering in town Saturday. Music, dancing, nothing fancy." She looked up. "You dance, Daniel Hale?" "Badly, but I'd rather be bad at it with someone than good at it alone." She was quiet. "I haven't danced in 11 years, she said. "Then we'll both be bad, and we won't care." She didn't say yes. She didn't say no. She looked back at her book, but he noticed because he paid the kind of attention that matters, that she was no longer reading. They arrived at the hall on a clear Saturday evening, the last of the light still gold on the ridge, the fiddle already audible from the street. Clara wore a dark blue dress she had brought from Cincinnati, the good one, the one she had told herself she was bringing for no reason in particular. The town noticed them. She had known it would. She walked in anyway. They danced badly, exactly as promised. Daniel with a concentration that was almost comic, Clara with a looseness that surprised her, a lightness in her body she had forgotten was possible, rising up from somewhere beneath all the years of careful management. By the second song, she was laughing, not performing laughter, not social laughter, real laughter, the kind that arrives without permission and doesn't care who sees it. And in that moment, in that small hall in Laramie, with the fiddle playing and the lantern swaying, and Daniel Hale trying with complete sincerity to remember which foot came next, Clara Whitmore understood something she had crossed 4 states and 1 very cold platform to learn. That it was not too late, that it had never been too late. That the woman who had stood on that platform in January and picked up her own trunk and walked, that woman had been right. Life was still ahead.
The thread was still running forward, and the man beside her, this quiet, steady, honest man, had known it about her before she had remembered it about herself. On a Tuesday morning in late April, in a small whitewashed chapel at the edge of Laramie, with morning light coming through plain windows and 6 witnesses who knew the full weight of what they were seeing, Clara Whitmore and Daniel Hale were married. No grand ceremony, no performance, just 2 people making a true thing official in front of witnesses who deserved to see it. When the pastor asked Daniel if he took this woman, he didn't search for words. He already chose her, he said, the day she stood at the edge of town and didn't fold. I just needed her to know it. And Clara, who had crossed 4 states on the word of a man who didn't deserve her trust, who had stood alone in the January cold and chosen to keep walking, who cried in the dark and then wiped her face and slept, who held a gun steady in the worst kind of night and never once flinched, looked at Daniel Hale with 58 years of everything she had survived and everything she had chosen, and said simply, "I chose back." She smiled then. Not widely, not for anyone else. Just the smile of a woman who has been looking for something real for a very long time, and has finally, in the most unexpected place, in the coldest season, at an age the world told her was too late, found it. Because here is what no one tells you about the women who survive everything quietly. They don't stop. They don't fold. They pick up what's theirs, and they walk. And somewhere, if the world is paying any attention at all, someone is leaning against a post at the edge of town, watching, waiting to say, "That looks heavier than it ought to be." If Clara's story moved something in you, if you've ever stood on a cold platform and had to decide whether to keep walking, then you already know what Desert Heart is about. Subscribe, hit that bell. Every week, we bring you stories of quiet courage, real love, and the kind of strength that never makes noise, but never, ever stops. Because the best stories, like the best people, are always worth waiting for. This story teaches that human worth does not expire with youth, that dignity, courage, and the capacity for love are not prizes reserved for the young. For older American viewers, Clara's journey mirrors the lived experience of reinvention after loss, of being underestimated and choosing to move forward regardless. It honors female self-reliance without spectacle. It shows that real partnership is built on honesty and presence, not performance. Daniel's character demonstrates that true strength in a man is quiet, consistent, and deeply respectful. The story also carries a powerful message about emotional survival, that grief does not disqualify us from joy, and the willingness to remain open even after betrayal is itself a profound form of courage. For any viewer who has ever felt that their best chapter was behind them, this story answers clearly, warmly, and without hesitation that it was not.